Good evening and thank you very much, Papama. Chancellor of the University of the Tshwane University of Technology, Dr. Gwen Malihwale Ramokgopa, ngwana wa mme Makato Lehwale le ntate Matume Ramokgopa Nkwe. Chairperson of TUT Council, Mr. Mpati Tilson Manyoni, TUT Ambassador par excellence, Mlochwa Mafuyanduna Pangindao. TUT members of the executive, DVCs, senior directors, executive directors, and special advisors. Executive deans, campus rectors, academics and professional staff, President General of the Institutional Student Representative Council, Ms. Nokwanda Kumalo, and all the student leaders who are present here today. Representatives of NEHAU at TUT, representatives of Ndeu at TUT, TUT business partners and donors who are present here today, former Minister of Finance, Mr. Tito Mboweni, Deputy Minister of Finance, Dr. David Masondo, former Minister of Science, Dr. Why do I forget your name now, Dr. Mangena, who is also in our midst. Dr. Masia Sotriikwa, acting DDG, University Education at the Department of Higher Education. Ms. Tinyiko Maluleke, Auditor General, South Africa. Mr. Risenga Maluleke, Statistician General, who has just left the stage. Dr. Ruel Koza, Chancellor of the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Professor David Musoma, former DVC at UNISA. Professor Itumeleng Musala, former Vice Chancellor of one of the constituent institutions that formed TUT. Prof. Mushenkondo, Member of Council at UNISA. Dr. Precious Moloi Mutsipe, Chancellor of the University of Cape Town. Professor Puleng Linkabula, Vice Chancellor and Principal, University of South Africa. Professor Christopher Ntlapo, Vice Chancellor and Principal, Cape Peninsula University of Technology. Professor Peter Mbati, Vice Chancellor and Principal, Sifako Makhato University. Prof. Litlokwa Mpedi, Deputy Vice Chancellor Academic, UJ. Prof. Samson Mashele, Acting DVC, Central University of Technology. Prof. Stuart Mutata, Registrar, University of South Africa. Shoma Josie, also known as Maya Wegerif. Is she here? Dr. Vusima Tasela, Dr. Thomas Chauke, and Dr. Nkuna. Her Majesty Queen Mother Manyaku Tulare, Queen of the Bapedi Kingdom, Kapukhadi Yaphahle, Kibabina Nuko. Your presence among us crowns TUT with untold glory. Hosi Njakanjaka Wabnaru, wa John Washtangoma Wamgungu wa Chaban wa Njakanjaka, the People's University welcomes you with open arms. Hosi Mwamintwa Wabumbiri, wa Fofoza Wamatlebezulu Wamawawa Mwamintwa, the university which produces knowledge that works salutes you. Hosi Nhlaniki wa vutsevu, the university whose graduates will shape the future of work, is elated that you have been able to join us today. Hosi Shilungwa Minga, Wasunduza, Watsugula Wankhavi, we as the university whose moral purpose is to empower people, feel both empowered and inspired by your presence in our midst today. Last but not least, allow me to observe the presence of the real and the ultimate Deputy Vice-Chancellor of the Tshwane University of Technology, the DVC behind and above all DVCs, Mrs. Danisa Noel Maluleke, and our three children, Hlanganani, Masana, Shihluke, and Sizwe. Can I ask them to stand? There's the Deputy Vice-Chancellor of the university. If anyone thinks it's hard to raise children, ask my family how hard it is to raise a Vice-Chancellor. They have tolerated all my eccentrics, my academic excesses, including my insistence on taking a bag full of books every time we go on holiday. A few of my siblings are here, such as Mrs. Velemina Ramanugu Maluleke, Mr. Josias Maluleke, Mrs. Susan Matebula, Mr. Walter Maluleke, and Lucky Maluleke, and many others whom I will not mention by name. All my big and small mothers who took turns to bring me up after the death of my biological mother are also here. Manda Heni, Noria Maluleke, Manishindalani, Rosi Maluleke, Kokwan Daina, Hazel Halata, Mani Meisi Maluleke, Manim Saven Maluleke. The only one missing is Manso Fisorisa Maluleke because she is not feeling well. Indeed, the entire Maluleke clan from the north and from the east has descended upon TUT tonight. It is impossible to acknowledge them one by one. Everyone who matters in both my family life and my work life is represented inside this hall right now. Members of the media, esteemed colleagues, members of TUT Council, friends, family, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is my singular honor to accept this huge but welcome responsibility of becoming the Vice-Chancellor and Principal of the Tshwane University of Technology. To mark my investiture as Vice-Chancellor, members of the Maluleke clan, including the Maluleke pensioners, donated money and bought me the suit, the shirt, the tie, the socks, and the shoes, which I am wearing today. How beautiful is that? To think that I could so easily have missed out on this beautiful occasion, an occasion which is reserved for the tiniest minority of those academics who are either foolish or brave or both to take on a job of Vice-Chancellor and Principal at a time like this, in a country like this. Quite honestly, I was almost giving up on the dream, thanks to the antics and the shenanigans of antagonists, naysayers, and Boku de Fozami, who seemed to emerge out of the woods each time I dared to raise my hand. Hey, vakololo bomshatoni. Vari vaya zvifunana vahanya kuita bandevedza mapango. And it seems to me that the men upstairs had other ideas. As the maverick academic, Michael Gladwell has noted in his best-selling David and Goliath, there comes a time when the sword and the armor of the mighty are no match for the sling and the stone of those who are determined to serve. And so, here I stand today, mellowed and chastened, but still madly in love with my first love, knowledge and knowledge creation. Here I am today, still madly in love with the sanctuary of the library. I am still in awe of the allegory of the laboratory, the telepathy in the telescope. I am still smitten with the serendipity of blue sky research and problem-solving research. And yes, Madam Chancellor, I am profoundly honored to take on this mantle of the largest contact university in South Africa and one of the leading universities of technology in the whole of Africa. Though I have traveled halfway around the world, academic conferencing and delivering more than 100 keynote addresses in universities big and small, there is no place in the world I would rather be, and there is no university in the world I would rather serve than the Tshwane University of Technology. And yes, Madam Chancellor, though I have worked in 5 South African universities so far, serving 3 of them in every executive management role imaginable, working in tiny library cubicles, pacing in large lecture halls, up to the corner office on the top floor, and down to the basement where the packers pack, the editors edit, and the printers print. And yet, were my life to be paused, rewound, and replayed, were I to be offered a second chance, I would still choose to serve this 18-year-old institution born of an arranged marriage between 2 historically black universities or technicons, that is Technikon Northern Gauteng and Technikon Northwest, and 1 historically white institution, Technikon Pretoria. This is where I would like to serve. The birth of this institution that is hosting us today and welcoming me into its bosom. The birth of this institution goes back to bullet point number 4 of section 3.3 of Government Gazette number 23549, volume 444 of 21 June 2002. The contents of the bullet are as simple as they were truncated. The section reads, the 3 technicons in the Tshwane Metropole, namely Technikon Northern Gauteng, Technikon Northwest, and Technikon Pretoria, should be merged. End of quote. But we must not be misled either by the simplicity of the sentence or the false subjunctive mood hinted in the phrase should be merged. This was not a wish, it was an imperative which was necessarily controversial and duly contested. Consider, for example, the stinging backhanded remark of Professor Peter Veil in the introduction of his co-audited essays titled Intellectual Traditions in South Africa. It was as if in the midst of justifying the validity of his South African intellectual traditions thesis, old Peter Veil, who is a good friend of mine, was hit by a bolt of lightning with a palpable sense of horror that his own project might have been unwittingly spun off the Kada Asmal project of measures. And he poses, this Peter Vane, a pithy, backhanded remark that is at once a rhetorical question and a devastating critique of measures. This is how he put it, and I quote him. What if this entente was born of the measure mania, which after sweeping through the business world had virally attacked academia with a devastating impact on ideas, on imagination, and on institutions. End of quote. Merger mania, he calls it. 18 years later, the measures which were outlined in Section 3 of Government Gazette, number 23549, volume 444 of 21 June 2002 were effected. I think today we are in a better position to assess and to pass verdicts on the effects of those measures now with the benefit of hindsight. Indeed, at TUT we need not say a word. We can let our actions and our track record speak for us. Like a phoenix born of 3 separate institutions, TUT has turned into a game-changing catalyst in the lives of more than 100,000 graduates and in the higher education sector ever since. We are more than 60,000 students strong. 2 of our campuses stand smack in the middle of townships, making higher education both visible and tangible in the very spaces and among the very people whom Hendrik Verwoerd had deemed incapable of higher learning. We have a campus, ladies and gentlemen, that sits on top of a coal mine in Emalahleni. We have a campus that is perched upon a hill at Mbombela. In the midst of Polokwane town, we have turned a government garage into a tiny, neat, clean and cool campus. TUT campuses stand like beacons of hope inside and outside the capital city. Aristotle, who was one of the most controversial philosophers who ever lived, controversial because he is sometimes, and I think rightfully so, regarded as the father of scientific racism. But in one of the more useful sections of his book on politics, Book 2, Chapter 2, he poses a rhetorical question that is worth our pause when he asks, or when he says, it is not clear whether people should be trained in what is useful for life, in what conduces to virtue, or in something out of the ordinary, end of quote. At TUT, I want to suggest to you, we do all 3 of those missions implied in the quotation of Aristotle above. All 3 missions, that is, training people in what is useful for life, training people in what conduces to virtue, and training people in something out of the ordinary is precisely what the Tshwane University of Technology is all about. We educate the head, the heart, and the hands. In the process, we produce artisans, technicians, technologists, economists, accountants, auditors, administrators, architects, computer programmers, computer scientists, journalists, science teachers, artists, engineers, and top-rate humanities scholars. We also train students in what conduces to virtue. For we impart skills which also build the character and cultivate TUT values in our students. Those values being the value of integrity, diversity, inclusion, equity, compassion, excellence, and accountability. And boy, don't we train our students in what Aristotle describes as something that is extraordinary. Consider the amazing work that TUT staff members are doing in our 18 centers and institutes, technology stations and incubators. Our students are making tools and car parts. They make sophisticated wheelchairs and other technological interventions for assisted living. They have made and are still perfecting an award-winning electric car. And while at it, the TUT student shows up on the institutional and sporting arena. I'm thinking here of the Stephen Mokokas of this world, the Caster Semenya of this world, the Refilwe Janas of this world, and the Dumisani Chaukes of this world. And that is not all. If TUT were to withdraw its graduates from the newsrooms of media houses in this country, many such houses would soon be liquidated, and SANEF might take the unprecedented action of marching to the gates of TUT, probably holding placards, "Maluleke must fall." In my short life in the glorious academy, I have read, I have met, and I've engaged colleagues of various orientations and inclinations. From academic troubadours who commute between theories, to Marxists who have never seriously read Marx, pre-colonials and post-colonials, feminists and Methodists. I'm not referring to you, Professor Musala. I have met them all. The smart, the witty, the quick, and the dead. My sense, Madam Chancellor, Honorable Chair of Council, is that at TUT, I am about to meet a different breed of knowledge workers. I am about to meet at TUT the scholar who is a cross between Antonio Gramsci's organic intellectual and Tupac Shakur's rose that grew from concrete. My intuition is that at TUT, I will find a knowledge worker who will neither fit neatly nor slot snugly into any of the 13 intellectual traditions canvassed by Professor Peter Vale and his colleagues in the book I referred to earlier. Madam Chancellor, Chair of Council, I know this because TUT is swarming with 1,000 knowledge workers, all of them adept at keeping the necessary creative tension between praxis in theory and theory in praxis. The TUT knowledge worker is she who trains students into loving knowledge. She who trains them into producing knowledge that works from first year to first job. I don't care that the TUT lecturer is often misunderstood, misnamed, and misspoken. I don't take seriously the ignorance of some about the role and the value of universities of technology. My hunch is that the TUT knowledge worker is one of the real and the main reasons the graduate unemployment rate stands at 7%, while the national unemployment rate moves steadily towards 50%. Granted, 7% unemployment rate is still high, but relative to the national one, it is nothing to be scoffed at. Indeed, it is my conviction that were it to be calculated using just and equitable metrics beyond the usual bean counting to which we have become accustomed, the actual and substantive contribution of this 18-year-old University of Technology as well as the other universities of technology, would amaze some skeptics and confound a few bureaucrats. Having spoken at length about the TUT staff, the academics, the truth of the matter is that all TUT staff, academic and non-academic, constitute a single unbroken garment. As I've said to my executive team at our recent strategic planning session, to stay a university that deserves its name, TUT must look, feel, and behave like a university. This can only happen with all hands on deck. Every worker, from the security guard to the professor, from the cleaner to the associate professor, all hands on deck. And yes, though I have guest lectured in several dozen universities and seminaries across the African continent and all over the world, and though I have supervised a bevy of postgraduate students nationally and globally, it is the TUT student who fascinates me and who occupies my mind. It is the TUT student who keeps me awake at night. Many of TUT students were supposed to go no further than matric, if at all. Many of them were supposed to stay locked up in villages where there are no opportunities. Many of the TUT students were supposed to swell the ranks of the so-called NEETs, N-E-E-T-S. But each one of them said, hell no, I am not going to go down that route. I am going to TUT. Here's the thing. By the time the TUT student rocks up at our gates, coming as she does from rural village at Kwamhlawiyalinga, from Lusikisiki, from Kadzingidzingi, from Kwabulawayo, from Lusaka, from Madombija, and from Maputo. By the time this student rocks up at our reception desk, that student has already proved her mettle. That student has already overcome great social and economic odds. As I move towards my conclusion, let me reiterate some of the things I've been saying to my executive team. The national vision for universities of technology is sound and foresighted. The TUT strategy is also sound and forward-looking, anchored as it is around the incubation of graduates who will shape the future of work, anchored as it is around the production of impactful research and problem-solving innovation. By every available metric and benchmark, TUT is a good university. But being a good university of technology is no longer good enough. Good is good insofar as it is better than bad. But if you'll pardon the pun, that is not good enough. To this end, I invite all the students of TUT, all the workers, academic and non-academic, to join hands and bid farewell to merely being good. Now is the time to use the good foundations we have to build a university that oozes and performs greatness. The road to greatness begins when TUT chooses to become that university of technology which only TUT can be. That university of technology which only TUT can be in South Africa and in the world. The journey from good to great begins now. And it begins with TUT ditching the tendency to see itself as a university of last resort. and begin to compete successfully for the best students in the land, for ICT, for engineering, for science, for arts, for humanities. We must compete for the best students available and not be content with being a university of last resort, as I have heard some of my colleagues saying to me shamelessly. We must infuse into our enrollment planning an element of quality, but not regarding ourselves as a university of last resort also means that once the students are inside the TUT system, they must complete and do so as close to record time as possible. A good success rate is no longer good enough. We need to work towards an excellent and amazing graduation rate. They must come in and get out. And if they stay, they must register for higher degrees and not parallel register and wish to stay with us forever and ever. Amen. We have to eliminate the contradiction between the perception of TUT as a university of last resort and our ambition to become a hub of artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, and readiness for the future of work. This contradiction between the perception that we are a university of last resort and this lofty ambition that we have is a contradiction that we dare not sustain. The journey from good to great begins now. It begins now as we put together a strategy that will see the number of TUT staff members with PhDs rising not only to the national average, because right now we are below the national average, but also rising above the national average. On the way to greatness, we have to increase the low numbers of women and native South Africans with PhDs, and we have to change the face of the professoriate in those regards as well. The journey from good to great begins now as we finalize a solid plan that will stop our annual per capita research outputs from behaving like the South African weather, which is now affected by climate change. 1 year up, 1 year down. 1 day up, 1 day down. We can't continue like that. At the moment, there are far too many TUT academics who are not research active. I fear that they may actually be in the majority. We are at work to change this. The journey from good to great starts now as we are in the midst of tightening up our levers, our policies, and our structures of governance, and beginning to promote ethical conduct. We are on our way to greatness when our infrastructure projects start clean, on time, and they are done well first time, each time, and finished on time. We are on our way to greatness when TUT campuses become free of gender-based violence so that staff, students, women, and members of the LGBTI+ communities can walk freely, work freely, and think freely. The journey from good to great begins now as the student affairs environment is putting the final touches to a strategy that will help us manage suicidal and risky behavior among our students. Quite literally, our students must stop dying early and dying needlessly and dying easy, sometimes through violence between and among themselves. We are on our way to greatness when our websites and news about us are saturated with the innovation and research matters, especially to do with our thought leadership in research about the future of work. The journey from good to great begins now as we make our campuses look, feel and behave like they belong to a great university of technology, from the gate up to the lecture hall, from the basement up to the top floor. Yes, our journey starts now with the EMC's pledge, that is the Executive Management Committee's pledge, to give at least 500,000 in research funding for the first TUT NRF A-rated researcher. I'm waiting for that researcher. I've put the money aside, and I may up the price if it will entice anyone to get A-rated. That's where I and my executive team will be taking TUT. That's where I'm going with this. In the lyrics of Jonathan Butler's hit song, based on the original by the Staple Sisters, "If you are ready, come go with me." But no, we will not wait for everyone to be ready. We will help them to get ready if we must. We are already on our way from good to great. Nothing and no one will stop us. To paraphrase Martin Luther King Jr.'s words while addressing students at Spelman College in 1960, my final message to TUT students and staff is that we have no choice but to raise the bar. And I paraphrase Martin Luther King's words in this manner. When we can't fly from good to great, then we will run. If we can't run, then we will walk. If we can't walk, then we will crawl. But whatever we do, we at TUT must and will keep moving from good to great. Thank you, Madam Chancellor.